Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com filling in for Hugh today. Merry Christmas to everyone. Merry belated Christmas. It is the 12 days of Christmas. I think we can say Merry Christmas every day this week and next week. So Merry Christmas to everyone. And I certainly hope that you had a great Christmas holiday. I do want to start off with a potential Christmas gift with you guys, for you guys, though. Salem Media is giving you a chance to win a once-in-a-lifetime inauguration VIP experience, a trip for two to Washington, D.C., tickets to the Trump inauguration, and tickets to an inaugural ball. To enter, you just need to text Trump, T-R-U-M-P, to 94878. That's Trump to 94878. Sounds pretty exciting. I know that whoever is going to end up getting this is going to be very excited to do this. There's nothing quite like a inauguration. Hopefully this inauguration is going to be better than the one 8 years ago when Washington, D.C. was aflame. But honestly, I guess we can talk a little bit about that. I don't think that we're at that pitch. We're going to talk a little bit more about Joe Biden's presidency. I think we're going to do that in the third hour, and how the left is trying to retcon it into something right out of the Manchurian Candidate. Joe Biden is the kindest, most decent, most brave president we've ever had, sort of thing. But I don't think that the political pitch right now is where it was at in January of 2017. I could be wrong. I guess we'll find out. But I don't think that we're seeing that same energy. I mean, the left is kind of thrown in the towel here. They're just trying to scramble to figure out how they can try to pitch one past the American electorate in 4 years, or 2 years, really, the midterms. I don't know. I think that we're going to probably see a much easier transition this time. I think, first off, for a couple of reasons. First off, Donald Trump is way ahead of where he was at 8 years ago. I think he learned a lesson that you have to get this stuff out of the way very early on if there are consequences that shake out of these choices for cabinet officials and that sort of thing. It's better to have that shake out early, as in before you get inaugurated and not after you get inaugurated. I think they have discovered that how important it was to try to get these positions filled as fast as possible. Not just the dozen or so top-ranking cabinet officials, but also the positions underneath those, the positions that are really going to be critical for policy and enforcement. And that's the reason why you have the border chief is already known, right? That's not a cabinet position. I think that Tom Homan was chosen even before Kristi Noem at HHS, who's putatively his boss. But I think that you see that as, first off, a signal of where the priority is going to be, and we're going to get to what deportations might mean a little bit later on, including economically. Because the left is starting to make the wine argument. We'll definitely be getting to that in the show today. But at any rate, I mean, the nice thing, the fun thing about this inaugural package that Salem is offering is not just the fact that, it's a great package. I mean, it's not easy to get into an inaugural ball, okay? This isn't something that it's not like if you stand in line for a couple of days outside the stadium, you're going to get let in. This is it's sort of it's a perk. It's definitely a perk. Also, you get the travel to Washington, D.C. to do this. And Washington, D.C. is a great town to visit. I wouldn't want to live there, but it's a great town to visit. There's all sorts of fun things that go along with this, and I just don't think that we're in the riot mood in the way that we were in 2017. And part of the reason why is because it wasn't really a surprise. There was no surprise that Donald Trump won this election. I think after he survived the getting shot in Butler County, Pennsylvania, I kind of think everybody expected it. This isn't the same thing as Hillary Clinton getting shocked in early November. I think really only the only surprise here was that Donald Trump managed to carry all 7 of the swing states, the states that we had sort of identified, if you will, as competitive. And I think there may have been some surprise at that, but there wasn't a surprise that Donald Trump won the presidency. And I think that plays a lot into what's going to happen on Washington, D.C. There's certainly going to be protests. I mean, there's always protests, right? There's always protests. But I would be very surprised if you saw, the burning limousines and smashing the windows out. And again, maybe I'm just being optimistic. But I just don't think the country's in the same place. I think the country is in a place where they have grown tired of this, and everybody kind of wants to move forward and figure out how they're going to get through the next 2 years, at least 4 years, if you will. And part of that is because I think that some of that attention is going to be focused on Congress. In 2017, Republicans had a fairly significant, I forget exactly what the numbers were, but had a fairly significant majority in the House, a decently significant majority in the Senate. And there was a sense that you really couldn't do anything in Congress, too. This time around, I think that there's at least some opportunity here for debate and for the opposing sides to get their issues and ideas through in the House. And maybe that's where you're going to see focus. And that's where it really should be. That's where it belongs anyway. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on Mike Johnson. We're just seeing him on the screen right now. Mike Johnson is already under a lot of pressure. And honestly, the very first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have the speaker vote. And that's turning into a fight, just the way it has been for the last 2 years. And perhaps the left is looking at this and saying, well, maybe we should let Republicans do what they're going to do. Maybe we should let them have an internecine food fight before we decide that we're going to make it, have a distraction from that. I don't know how well planned out this is going to be on the left. How if you're even going to see a resistance. 8 years ago, the whole political environment was filled with talk of resistance, which is antithetical to democracy anyway. You don't have resistance, you have elections. When you lose elections, you move on and go look for the next election. And I wrote that at the time, too, 8 years ago, when we had the riots in Washington, D.C., and people were proclaiming resistance, and Democrats in Congress were proclaiming resistance. I had a column up in the New York Post saying how antithetical to democracy that was, because this is a democracy. Trump won the election, even if he, at that time, hadn't won the popular vote. And that's probably one of the big differences between now and 8 years ago, too. And I think that the idea of resistance, you're still seeing it pop up. I see it sort of more like people talking about it in a meta sort of way, like we're going to restart the resistance. Well, they had a resistance before, and so any opposition to Donald Trump is kind of resistance. I just don't see that same vibe, if you will, since we just got done with a vibe election. I don't see the same vibe. I see this as a period of time now where people are going to start to approach reality. We've got a couple stories about that. We might talk about one of those this hour, actually, about reality and how that enters or doesn't enter into official proceedings, in this particular case, in a courtroom. But I think that this is a point in time where people are going to be a little bit more introspective about what actually happened, and that is in part because Donald Trump won the popular vote this time around. And it's in part because people are also processing how badly the previous administration lied to the American public. And we haven't even gotten really, in terms of a national conversation, we haven't even gotten to the worst scandal of the Joe Biden era. We're going to talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit in hour 3, but just to mention it right now, the American people have been lied to for 4 years about Joe Biden's cognitive status. And now you're getting reporting that started on day one of his presidency. You can arguably say it started in 2019 when Joe Biden was at the top of the polls, and it became obvious even to his competitors in the Democrat primary at that time that Joe Biden was not cognitively able to be president. And we have not yet even started to come to terms with that cover-up, thanks in large part to the protection racket media that refuses to discuss it. Just the same way that they refused to discuss the Hunter Biden laptop story because they said it was Russian disinformation. They lied. There's been a continuous dishonest coverage of this presidency. The presidency itself was dishonest. Joe Biden himself is a dishonest person. And I think at the end of 4 years of that, there is just a sort of exhaustion with all of that propagandizing, all of that nonsense that they've been trying to feed the American electorate, and I don't think that there's just any appetite for a rabid counter-reaction to Donald Trump coming into office again. I think, given where we're at in this country, he's going to have a honeymoon for at least a little while to see whether or not he can correct some of these excesses from the past 4 years. All right. I just want to point out that our friends at Americans for Prosperity made a huge difference this election year. Americans for Prosperity volunteers made millions of voter contacts, which is just mind-blowing. They are the largest, most effective ground game operation in the country to defend and advance the conservative movement. But now that the election is behind us, the hard work of turning electoral victory into policy wins begins, and the grassroots army with Americans for Prosperity will again be in the thick of it. We have an incredible opportunity next year to get the country back on track, but it means we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. If you're ready to join a winning team making a difference across the country, check out our friends at AFP. Learn more at americansforprosperity.org. That's americansforprosperity.org. Yeah, they did a great job this year, and this is ground that has been more or less ceded to the super PACs, right, and the outside orgs in politics. It used to be that the candidates themselves and their campaigns would do this, but it's a good thing that Americans for Prosperity is picking up the slack, because without that, I think we would have had a much different outcome this election cycle. And these things make a difference. I wrote a whole book about that, Going Red. It was all about peer-to-peer politicking and being part of the communities that you want to convert to your cause. And Americans for Prosperity has been doing this for quite a few years. They're actually featured in my book as well, because they have been in communities teaching entrepreneurialism, business operations, just, good economic education, delivering that to cities across the country. They've been doing that for quite a while. So this is just the next phase of this. So americansforprosperity.org, great organization. They delivered us an early Christmas gift, Dwayne, and I was very pleased to open it when I did. But let me ask you, Dwayne, are you a Christmas Eve gift family, or? Okay.
No.
There you go. Okay,
we were never a Christmas Eve household. I know there's people that like to do like one gift on Christmas. Nah, it's Christmas Day.
No, we used to do one gift on Christmas Eve, but other than that, everything else was Christmas Day. No, you couldn't open anything till Christmas Day.
No, we were at least when I was an adult, it was always the last minute stockings and all the stuff was done with the Pope. You would watch because we're on the West Coast. We'd watch the midnight mass as you're doing all the last minute dispersal of stuff, and that way everything was ready by Christmas morning.
And I know people who do Christmas Eve, for opening the presents. I just don't get that. To me, it's got to be Christmas morning. You got to get up in the morning.
You waited all year long. You waited all year long. You can wait one more night.
Yeah. And I think to some extent it might be because little kids, And I have, for my Christmas Eve, I sang at 2 different masses on Christmas Eve. So my voice was a little raw yesterday, and I'm hoping it's going to be, good for 3 hours today. But the choir director at my church, I was joking around with her because she wasn't going to have to come back to church the next morning for the morning mass. Somebody else was going to handle it, and I said, and she's got 6 kids, and I said, it was 1:30 in the morning at this point in time, and I said, well, you've got an early call coming up anyway, and she was like, oh, I know. So maybe in her case I would have excused it, right? The Christmas Eve gift opening, I might have excused it in her case. But yeah, I know it's got to be Christmas morning for me.
Well, and the other thing is, in my circumstance, my family now, our son is a Christmas Eve birthday baby. So we just celebrated his 21st birthday, and that always consumes Christmas Eve day. So we make sure we completely separate Christmas from his birthday. We spent Christmas Eve making a day trip to Vegas and back, and still got back in time for a candlelight service.
I finally found a cover version of Santa Baby that I hate more than Madonna's. Now, I love the Eartha Kitt Santa Baby, right? That's pure.
That's the prototype. That's the legitimate version of the song. Right?
It's the only version. The Eartha Kitt version is the only version of that song, right? I mean, it's playful, it's sexy, but it's not overly, it's not overly in that direction, and it's just enough to be witty and a little sparkly. And then Madonna came along, and I think it was in the 1980s, or it might have been the early 1990s, and I guess I can't describe it the way I'd normally describe it, but let's just call it the cheap version of Santa Baby.
Kind of trailer parked it up.
Trailer parked it up. That's an even better way of putting it. It trailer parked it up. There's no subtlety to it whatsoever. There's no vocal stylings to it whatsoever. I mean, Eartha Kitt had this beautiful voice. Madonna doesn't. And she's popular, but she doesn't really have a very good voice. And so I've always disliked the Madonna version of this almost as much as I dislike Last Christmas and Wonderful Christmas Time. Those are my top three avoided all costs Christmas carols, right? But now I have a new one, which is Kim Kardashian's Santa Baby. And I don't think Dwayne and Adam have seen that. I think Adam's seen it now, but I'm not sure if Dwayne has had a chance to take a look at this.
I saw it during the break, and now I can't unsee it.
I don't even know how you describe this. I'll tell you how my colleague David Strom described it at Hot Air on Monday, because this is where I saw it. David saw it on Twitter, and he posted about it. Kim Kardashian's Christmas video, which is as dark, perverted, and demonic as you might expect. It doesn't quite include pentagrams and human sacrifice, but it mixes sex, intoxication, perversion of all that is good and right, and anti-Christian imagery into a witch's brew of demonic celebration of sin.
You remember the Olympics this last time around, and they did they did their version of the Last Supper?
Yes.
That's kind of what this is.
And look, I'm not saying that people can't do that. I mean, they're certainly welcome to do that. It's a free country. Let me correct the statement. It's becoming a free country again. So I'm not saying that you can't do this. I'm just curious as to why somebody would do this. Now, for those of you who have blessedly not been exposed to Kim Kardashian's cover of Santa Baby, I'm assuming it's her singing it. But mostly the video is her crawling around in skin-tight clothes through this bacchanalia of a party that is, clearly it's stitched together. She keeps crawling through from room to room with the most bizarre imagery.
Yes. It's like Santa Babies put together on the set of Caligula.
That's it, Caligula. I was trying to think of the cinematic. I was going to say it makes Eyes Wide Shut look like holiday fair.
Yeah, no, it's more Caligula.
Caligula. That's where I'm going with this.
It's like the last days of Rome.
It's just bizarre, and the song itself is. The performance of the song itself, just not the video, but the performance of the song itself is nothing special either. But this video is just so strange. And, I mean, this is Christmas season. I get that people like to play around with themes and tropes and parody them, somewhat satirize them. But I'm not even sure that that's what the intention of this was. I think the intention of this was really to celebrate just all of the deviant behavior that you can possibly imagine. And I'm not even sure it celebrated it. Right? I mean, maybe at some point in time, anthropologists will look back on this and say, well, this was actually a condemnation of Hollywood and, in the sort of the way that Mulholland Drive was. And nobody could figure it out because David Lynch wanted to keep working in Hollywood while he was condemning it. So maybe this is the Mulholland Drive of Santa Baby?
Well,
I mean, it's really inexplicable.
But
it's inexplicable, Dwayne.
But here's kind of where we're at as a society, right? Over the last 4 years, with progressives running the White House because we didn't really have a president. So we had a bunch of progressives that were basically running a back channel. We're going to go as hard left as we can. All the woke stuff, all the pronoun stuff, all the decadent stuff, and normalizing all of that has gone on for so long. We started to see the pendulum swing back for a lot of reasons, economic, but social as well in the election. So the question now is this pendulum actually going to swing back as a culture, or is the progressives not going to want to give up any ground they had, and they're just going to keep pushing the envelope? And so we're kind of in that really weird period of, are we actually watching peak moral decay, or is there going to be kind of a swing back from it for a little while?
Well, I believe in America, and America has pendulum swings, right?
I think
and even pop culture does.
Bit, yeah.
Even pop culture does. And I think that there is going to be a recovery of a certain level of not just moral sense, but reality. We're going to get to a story in the next hour. It talks a little bit about that. Again, I was talking about it in the first segment. It's a story from the courts in California, but we're going to put that off until next hour. But just to stay on, the whole, culture wars, I guess. And this is kind of a culture war. Again, I mean, I guess you can make an argument that maybe this is the Kardashians arguing against all of this excess. But I mean, it's really, I don't know. It's a strange sort of thing. Yesterday, families gathered to celebrate traditional values. And even if you're not celebrating Christmas itself, or if you're not Christian or not that into the Christian faith, you get together with family, you get to and celebrate what you have in common, all the common experiences of the culture. And this is not it. This is like the fringe.
Yeah.
And so we were watching, I don't know if you've ever, everybody's seen A Christmas Story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Okay. My mother had not seen A Christmas Story until last night.
Really?
Yeah. It just, she hadn't seen it.
What?
So I said,
we're
going to watch it.
Is she Hugh?
She's watching this right now too, and so we're gonna have a conversation a little bit later on. But I said, well, we're gonna watch it today, and she liked it. She was not as enthralled by it as I am. I love that movie. And then we played the sequel, which came out 2 years ago. Peter Billingsley. It's really good, Dwayne. A Christmas Story Christmas. Did you ever watch it?
I never watched it.
It's really good. It's actually,
in my head, there was no way a sequel that much later was going to work.
You know why it works though? Because it shifts the perspective. Instead of being focused on him as a little boy, it's focused on him as a father who has to now be in charge. Because the way they deal with Darren McGavin's death is the old man. He passes away. It's right at the beginning of the movie. I'm not giving away any spoilers. They bring back almost all the same cast, including Peter Billingsley, who's a Hollywood producer these days, and it's really touching. It's very good. But what is it? It's not about perfect Christmases. In fact, the whole point of this thing is there's really no such thing as a perfect Christmas. It's always hard work. There's always things that go wrong. The point is being together and sharing all those common memories, and sharing the love, and being part of something that is greater than your erogenous zones.
Yes.
Right? And my mother at the end of this said that was a much better movie than the first one. And I agree with her. I actually think it's a much better movie than the first one. As much as I love the first one, the second one has a lot more to say. And it's it wasn't going to win an Oscar anyway. It was made for HBO Max, and I think it's still exclusively on Max. So if you don't have Max, you're not going to be able to get a chance to see it. But it's that type of thing that reminds you that we're not talking about perfect people or perfect Christmases. Far from it. We're talking about people who have their problems and families that have their stresses. But what we're talking about is sharing in a set of values that is inclusive in all the right ways. And when you're taking a look at this, whatever it is that you want to talk about that Kim Kardashian did, it's a celebration of everything that's bizarre. It's a celebration of everything that's deviant. It's a celebration of everything that opposes that type of idea. And that's the reason why David called it demonic. And I don't know that I'd go that far, but it's idiotic at the very least.
Right.
And at least it has made Madonna's Santa Baby not the worst cover version of that ever. She managed to dethrone that. That is an accomplishment, Dwayne.
Well,
all right.
I guess so.
Apparently, I don't have any limits on Christmas entertainment, though. I did watch a little bit of the Netflix football games yesterday while we were getting ready for Christmas stuff with the family, and I'm not alone. According to reports, I guess Netflix is saying that a third of their subscriber base watched at least part of the Pittsburgh Steelers Kansas City Chiefs game, which did not turn out well for my team. I'm half expecting Hugh to call in to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers game yesterday. They did not look good. But
after the year
90
Cleveland's had, he's not talked a lot about football except the draft.
Yeah, at least the Steelers are going to be in the playoffs. They're not going to get far if they keep playing the way that they've been playing the last 3 weeks, but at least they're going to be in the playoffs this year. But at any rate, 90 million people apparently through Netflix. These were Netflix exclusive games too. So you had to have a Netflix account to stream these. And I watched enough of the Steelers game. I didn't see too much of the second game. And frankly, it just escapes me who was playing in that game right. Oh, it was the Ravens playing against the Texans, excuse me. I saw a little bit of that as well. To know that they actually handled it well. I mean, the whole boxing match between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul was that failed completely. The streaming, they didn't put enough servers on it. They needed at least two more hamsters on the wheels. But it actually worked pretty well. I didn't have any issues with it, and I didn't hear about anybody having issues with it. So whatever happened during the Tyson-Paul fight, they fixed. So good for them. I thought the commentators were good. I thought technically they handled it, I guess competently. I don't know that it was spectacularly, but competently. 90 million. That's pretty good. LeBron James had something to say about that, Dwayne. Why don't we play that cut?
I love the NFL, but Christmas is our day.
Christmas is our day, says LeBron James.
Yeah, this is our day, LeBron James said. I'm not sure if that came across cleanly or not, but so our friend John Andrasik had something to say about that, the NBA Finals averaged 11.3 million viewers per game last year, and that was the finals. That wasn't Christmas Day. That was the finals. I don't know if you can even find the ratings for that. The fact of the matter is that the NFL is a cultural phenomenon, right? And the NFL, I think, has fixed some of its problems along those lines too, because they spent a few years trying to alienate a good part of their fan base, and sort of like Disney has suddenly discovered, they've decided that maybe politics shouldn't play that big of a role in their entertainment, and they've backed way off of a lot of this, woke. They haven't completely separated themselves from it, but they've dialed it way back, and I think to the point now where you're getting people coming back to the game. Because it is part of that shared experience. It's one of those things that you can do with your family and your friends. Even if you disagree on other things, you can kind of come together to root for or root against a team and enjoy some of that. And you can have it on in the background while you're doing other things, which was kind of what I was doing yesterday, especially because the Steelers were losing. It was definitely on in the background. But it's there and it's not threatening. It doesn't try to insult you. It doesn't try to denigrate your values. It's just there so you can enjoy and be entertained. And Disney is doing that too. I mean, I know that Dwayne, you're a big consumer of Disney, and the fact that they have decided to dispense with the transgender storyline in this latest thing, I mean, that actually, I
There
think
is
is
kind
progress.
there is kind of a pendulum swing going on even within
I think so.
Disney. They have not only abandoned that kind of story plot line from the next Pixar movie, but at the parks. If you look at, we're annual pass holders because we've got two miscellaneous random people that live with us that work there,
Right.
so we're there all the time, and they release their list of days next year. This day, that day, and all the rest. Pride Day is not there next year. They're just like dropping it. They're dropping all the quote days because they're done with this stuff. It's time to just actually provide a family experience for the people that are spending money there.
It's time to get back to what unifies us, right, rather than what divides us. And I think Disney's learning that. I think the NFL has learned that. So we're going to turn our eyes right now towards foreign policy. And joining us right now to do that is Noah Rothman from National Review. Noah, we're going to talk a little bit about Ukraine. You had a good piece up earlier this week about Donald Trump's approach to Ukraine. I also want to talk about the latest developments in Gaza. Where it looks like Hamas is back to playing Lucy in the football with hostage negotiations. And I'll leave it up to you. What one do you want to tackle first?
We can start with Ukraine. We've got some pretty hopeful news from my perspective. Out of the Financial Times, they reported right before Christmas that Trump's allies were retailing to European powers some asks in relation to Ukraine, because we've known that on the campaign trail, Donald Trump has been a little hostile to the cause and increasingly hostile over the course of the campaign, especially into the fall. And he surrounded himself with some people who are skeptics of the Ukrainian cause. But that's not what we're getting in policy, apparently. The FT reports that the Trump administration is not conditioning the disbursement of military aid, lethal support for Ukraine's sovereignty on anything. It will continue that level of support until it can induce negotiations, at least, I would imagine, good faith negotiations from Moscow, which is going to take a lot of conditioning on the battlefield, at least. What Donald Trump wants to see from European powers is an increase in defense spending relative to GDP. Now, he's going to say 5%, which is a lot beyond even what we do. We're about 3.5% of GDP. But there are some Europeans who are telling the FT that on background, the Trump administration would probably accept something more like 3.5%, which is totally rational, totally reasonable. All of this is consistent and consonant with a policy that believes maintaining security in Europe is a paramount American national interest. You can't say everybody in Europe needs to spend more on defense while also saying, well, this conflict here with Russia and Ukraine doesn't really affect us much. I mean, Donald Trump said as much to Kristen Welker in that interview with NBC News 2 weeks ago, where he said, we've got an ocean between us, which is just a foolish thing to say in the age of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So the Trump administration,
Right.
if this is its policy, is coming around to something that makes a lot more sense. And I think you'd get more defense spending from European powers if the United States exited the region entirely. Paradoxically, we'd get to where Donald Trump wants. The United States would just have far less influence over the course of events in a critical region to its permanent security interests. So this policy, at least in my mind, looks smart and probably is something that you can get European powers on board with.
Well, and Noah, I mean, I think that there is something to be said, too, that Donald Trump likes to stake out negotiating positions on the far reaches, right? And that might be true with Gaza, too, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But I think that when you're looking at this, I think that he's basically tried to deliver bad news in equal measures to both Putin and Zelensky in Ukraine. He's telling Russia, if you don't shut this thing down, we're going to ramp up defense spending, and it's going to make your life a lot more complicated. And he's telling Zelensky, if you don't wrap this thing up pretty soon, we might decide that we've got better things to do with our money. That may be just a way to pressure both sides into coming up with some sort of livable compromise, which, sounds terrible, but in reality is probably unavoidable unless you want just perpetual war in the Donbass.
Well, it's possible. It is a failure of imagination to not envision the utter collapse of either the Russian or Ukrainian position. That's certainly something
Right.
that is dominant in the thinking in the Kremlin, probably in Kyiv as well. Yeah, sure, you can make really wild-eyed asks, but they have to be credible to at least encourage movement on the part of the person you're negotiating against. If you're just making an incredible ask that is beyond any rational stance, then you're not going to get a lot of movement from your negotiating partner. And frankly, both these powers think there's a lot of movement on the battlefield yet to happen. And until that fluidity occurs, we get a real static dynamic. You might see some willingness to negotiate, like we saw a static dynamic like we saw over the course of the summer of last year. And it is no longer. There is movement on the battlefield, and Russia is advancing in a lot of different directions. So to get them to back off and seek a negotiated settlement that doesn't leave them with a frozen conflict that Russia can just thaw out whenever it wants, which it does very frequently. I think where there's a lot more fighting to do before we get to that place.
Well, and frozen conflicts are sort of a specialty since World War One, right? And I mean, I would equate some of that static quality on the battlefield in Ukraine to World War One. The trench warfare, things didn't move. One side would move a few yards, then the other side would move a few yards, and we've been kind of seeing that really since the first months of this campaign. It's been pretty static. Now, I get that there's some fluidity now, but again, I'm not necessarily sure that you're going to have a breakout in either direction any longer. I think that there's just too much being thrown in there, and at some point, you have to figure out how you get past that. That being said, World War One is probably not the greatest analogy of that, because World War One basically set up World War Two. So because it became in a sense a frozen conflict. The players all changed, but the conflict remained, right? And that that's also like Gaza, right? This is the same type of thing. We've been freezing this conflict for the last 19 years. And Israel has decided that it doesn't want a frozen conflict there any longer, doesn't want a frozen conflict in Lebanon, doesn't want a frozen conflict with Syria. So they decided to do, full-blown war, and they are actually making concrete steps towards changing the region. I mean, dramatic changes to the region. This is maybe World War II is the analogy for what's happened in the Middle East right now. But they still have the hostage situation in Gaza, which is a huge political headache for the current government for lots of very good reasons. They're trying to figure out a way to resolve this with at least the hostage end of this with Hamas, who just is not a good faith partner in negotiations at any time ever. And over the last couple of days, we've heard the same thing happen that's been happening for the last 13 months, which is that Hamas keeps changing the terms and keeps reneging on concessions that were supposedly made in order to try to put pressure on Israel to put an end to the war that Hamas started. Where is your sense on where this is heading, and how does Donald Trump's pledge to unleash hell on people who hold American hostages play into this? Do they have a sense that time is running out, or do they think that Trump just is issuing an empty threat here?
I don't know, and I don't know if that is a credible threat. I'm not sure if the Gazans, or the Hamas, to the extent that Hamas has a regime left in Gaza, I don't know that it's especially afraid of American intervention in that conflict. The prospect seems remote, and it's not as though the IDF is anything that is less of a deterrent factor. The IDF is just as capable, if not more so, in that region as the United States Air Force. So I wouldn't be surprised if that threat is really resonant here. I would ask U.S. policymakers to adopt the same paradigm that I would apply to the Ukrainian theater and envision victory. Imagine the outcomes that would result from seeing an American adversary, in this case Hamas, in Ukraine's case Russia, degraded to a degree that either they no longer represent the political and military threat that they do to their particular regions, or they're denuded to the degree that we can afford to take less of. They don't dominate the thinking when it comes to war planning and strategic planning in their regions. I mean, that is a great outcome. And what we would do to work towards those outcomes, the steps we would take in that direction, would make a lot more sense if we were to envision a set of conditions that resemble victory. I don't think our United States, Washington, London, Paris, old world, capitals, I don't think they think in those terms anymore. It's naive. It's gauche to assume that you can affect by military means alone, affect some sort of a durable settlement that would advance your interests. Yeah, sure, it's nice to think in those terms, but it's just unrealistic, and we all have to settle for half a loaf. That's not what the Israelis have been doing over the course of the last year, reshaping their regions and decimating Hamas's various terrorist proxies that orbit around Tehran. They're changing the landscape over there in ways that will be reflective of Israeli action over the course of the next 20, 30 years. It's the sort of thing that we should all be working towards and celebrating Israeli victories and looking at that as a model and saying, how could we also reshape our regions and defang the actors that threaten us, and maybe in ways that are semi-permanent, That's the sort of thinking that I think is lost in Washington. I'd like to see more of it.
Noah Rothman, I couldn't agree with you more, and it starts with Iran and treating Iran like the enemy that it actually is. I'm a fan of disco. I don't think I've ever heard that song or the previous one, the disco I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus. They are deep in the archives today, folks. Deep in the archives.
That one actually did sound like ABBA. Didn't it?
I am insulted by that, sir. How dare you sully the name of ABBA with that stuff? I'm telling you, maybe a little bit, maybe just a little bit. All right. Let's get to some serious stuff. This is serious stuff. There are many good reasons to buy gold and silver. Bank failures, digital currency volatility, emerging market countries trying to topple the dollar as a global reserve currency. AmFed coin and bullion is Hugh's choice for precious metals. If you ask AmFed owner Nick Grovich to simplify the case for precious metals, he'll tell you when President Roosevelt recalled the gold in circulation and paid people with paper money, they received a $20 bill for a $20 gold piece. Today, that $20 bill won't even fill half of your gas tank, but the gold piece is worth over $2,600. Now, which would you rather own? Let's simplify the reasons to use AmFed coin and bullion. Nick's been in the industry for over 42 years, and he's proud of providing transparency and fair pricing to build trusted relationships. If you're interested in buying or selling, call Nick and his team at AmFed Coin and Bullion, 800-221-7694, AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694. These days, with inflation being what it is, and I tell you, that's you have to be thinking about precious metals. If you've got an investment strategy, it has to have at least part of that. You have to have part of the investment strategy in precious metals because it's the only real hedge that you've got against inflation. And when I say real, I mean real, as in terms of actual physical hedge against inflation. By the way, also while we're talking about this, and I just want to make sure we get this in as often as we can, Salem Media is giving you a chance to win a once-in-a-lifetime inauguration VIP experience. A trip for two to Washington, D.C. That includes hotel accommodations, tickets to the Trump inauguration, and tickets to an inaugural ball. To enter, you just text Trump, T-R-U-M-P, to 94878. That's Trump to 94878. You text that, you get you enter the sweepstakes, and it looks like there's also a $600 gift card that's part of that. So you have some spending cash in your pocket. You got the airline tickets, hotel. I mean, this is a big deal. And it really should be a fun evening. We talked about this in the first hour. It really should be a fun trip, really. And I don't think that we're going to see the same miserable experience that we saw in 2017. And even then, the inaugural balls were fun. Just being in D.C. that day was probably not so fun. But I don't think we're going to have that problem this time around. We talked a little bit about that in the first hour, just because I think that the country has changed. And I think I think there's more unity behind the idea that we need to restore some values. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next segment too. We talked about some of the values that need restoring in the first hour. We need less Kardashian Santa baby and probably a little less disco Christmas music too. Just to be fair, maybe a little bit more A Christmas Story, Miracle on 34th Street, maybe a little bit more, I don't know, even Die Hard, right? That's a Christmas movie, or so I've been told. I don't know. I think it's more of a Hanukkah movie. By the way, happy Hanukkah to all of our Jewish friends out there who are listening today. We've been saying Merry Christmas all day long, but happy Hanukkah to all of you who celebrate. And unusual this year, they landed on the same day, which Christmas and Hanukkah started on the same day. And that's, I think, the 5th time in the last century that happens, because, of course, we use different calendars. And so it's kind of special this year to see Christmas and Hanukkah starting at the same time, and we're all celebrating at the same time. So, but and it gets back again to shared values. Doesn't mean you agree on everything. In fact, it probably means you don't. But shared values, shared customs, shared culture, I think that's important. I think we're getting back to that. So this Salem trip to Washington, D.C. is coming at a really good time. Somebody's going to be very fortunate to win that. Pretty sure it's not going to be me, because I'm pretty sure I don't qualify. We were talking about Christmas values. We're talking about values and culture, and how we think the pendulum's swinging back. However, it has to swing back a pretty long way to get back to normal. And I think that in Madera County, California, you get a sense of just how far the pendulum is going to have to swing back. There is a trial that is going to take place. It's a rape trial involving a biologically male prisoner who was housed in a women's prison because he claimed he was a woman. And California has a new law that says that that's all that's required, and that California is required to house people based on the gender of their own choice. Since they housed this particular gentleman in, and I use that term very firmly, in a women's prison, they've had one inmate become pregnant and 2 others claiming that they were raped by this gentleman. And so now he's on trial for rape. And you would expect that at this point, some common sense would prevail in Madera County. You would be wrong. We have a clip here. It's a little bit of a longish clip. Let's go to cut number 6 to explain what's going on in this case, because you're not going to believe this.
52-year-old state prisoner Tremaine Carroll must be referred to with she/her pronouns because Carroll identifies as a woman. But the district attorney believes the defendant is abusing the system.
This is a person who's not a woman in any sense of the word.
In March, DA Sally Moreno charged Carroll for rape allegedly committed while incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla.
After his first cellmate became pregnant and was moved to Los Angeles, 2 other cellmates of his complained that he had raped them. So we have filed rape charges against this inmate.
Moreno says the ruling regarding pronouns impacts her ability to prosecute the case.
This is a particular issue in this case because it's confusing to the jury. In California, rape is a crime that has to be accomplished by a man.
Supervising Deputy DA Eric Dutemple says it's also unfair to the victims.
It's just absolutely insane that a victim would have to get on the stand and police their pronouns and their usage when trying to recite one of the most scariest times in their lives.
Carroll was allowed to serve time in a women's prison despite being a biological male because of Senate Bill 132, the Transgender Respect Agency and Dignity Act, which took effect in 2021. It allows inmates to be housed with the gender they identify as. The CDCR website points out state law prohibits discrimination based on gender identity.
There's no psychological evaluation that needs to be done. This person doesn't need to be on cross-gender hormones. They don't need to be signed up for transgender surgery. They don't even need a significant psychological evaluation regarding gender confusion. The mere statement is enough.
The mere statement is enough to override biological reality. And just let this settle in for a bit. The state legislature passed a bill that basically requires the prison system in the state and arguably the judge in this case to bend to this person's either delusion or fraud. And I suspect it's probably the latter. This is a guy who is claiming to be female, so he can be locked up with potential prey. And he's acted on that, apparently several times. And yet this judge is saying he deserves dignity. That is a quote from the story here, that the judge is claiming that Tremaine Carroll deserves dignity, and that's the reason why prosecutors, witnesses, and the victims will have to refer to Tremaine Carroll with she, her pronouns during the course of this trial. And I can't even wrap my head around all the different ways that this is insane. But let's just start with the fact that courts are supposed to be forums for truth. You get up, and what do? The first time you get up on the witness stand, you raise your right hand and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Officers of the court are supposed to be bound by that as well, including the judge. But the attorneys are supposed to be bound by the need to tell the truth, because the outcome of a trial is a criminal trial is a verdict. And a verdict is, as my cousin Vinny amusingly explained once, verdict is a term that comes down from our little old ancestors, as a prosecutor said in My Cousin Vinny. And it's true. It's an Anglo-Norman word that is it's a portmanteau from ver, which meant in Anglo-Norman truth, and dit, which meant to speak. It means to speak the truth. The verdict is to speak the truth. And what you have here is a judge setting the basis of this trial on a lie. This is not a woman. This is not a she, her. This is a man who is raping women in prison because the state of California locks women up with a rapist. Now, they do that at the same time that they're saying that believe all women, Me Too, that claiming that Republicans have a war on women. Well, this is the war on women. Democrats and progressives want to erase the whole definition of woman. For that matter, they probably want to erase the definition of man too. But the victims in this case are going to be overwhelmingly women, and in this particular case, the victims are entirely women. It's true when you are forcing schools and athletic organizations to allow biological males to compete against females. Same thing. It erases women's positions in these sports. It victimizes them because they are put into direct physical confrontation with biological males, which biologically is a recipe for disaster. I mean, we saw this at the Olympics, right? Earlier this year, where a biological male, an XY person, got into a ring with women and literally beat the hell out of them, and was celebrated for doing this. And up until the time that at least one of the women finally publicly objected to this. Riley Gaines has been talking about this for some time now. There's this story that is from earlier this year where a volleyball player incurred a significant brain injury because a biological male was allowed to play against them and ended up spiking the ball in her face, and basically ending any hope that she had for competing in that sport ever again. These are delusions, and we have the state of California, certainly in a literal sense, but in a general sense, we have the state forcing us to go along with these delusions. Why? Not because there's any broad benefit to the overall culture, not because it actually helps advance anyone's cause, but it's to basically virtue signal to the same progressive lefties that are insisting on this. And that's it. That's the whole benefit here. What was the benefit of putting Tremaine Carroll in a women's prison? What was the benefit? Who benefited from that? Well, Tremaine Carroll did. And progressives benefited from it because it made them feel good, that they could say, well, look what we're doing. We're modern, you know, we're redefining everything, and our definition is great. I would hesitate to say that in the face of victims who are now having to testify against this person and being told you have to pretend that the person who raped you is a woman. Now imagine that for just a moment. And it's not that prison rape doesn't occur in men's facilities too, and it's horrible and it should be punished. This is a different argument. This is the state of California passing a law the state legislature passing a law which then requires the prison system to house sex offenders with women who don't have the opportunity to defend themselves because they themselves are being locked up for other crimes. It is basically delivering prey to the predator. And this person, and it took 3 times for the state of California to finally do something about this. And they're still trying to pretend that this guy is a woman in court where you're supposed to speak the truth. There is no way that you can argue that this person is a woman at the same time that you're arguing that he's raping women with, I'm not sure how much I can say on the air, but with the genitalia of a man. I'm hopeful that the jury in this case can see through the nonsense and convict Tremaine Carroll anyway, because he's, that's where I'm hoping this goes. But this insanity, this is one of those what you would consider a reductio ad absurdum example of this nonsense. But unfortunately, it's real life. Unfortunately, real people got victimized by this, and the state of California is pretending that it's not an accessory to these crimes. The state of California is an accessory to these crimes. The judge in this case is basically making the trial an accessory in these crimes, and that is where the pendulum is at right now. That's how far back the pendulum has to go. And I'm hoping that we can push it back a considerable distance over the next 4 years. We're just talking about swinging the pendulum back on some of the things, the excesses of the last several years, especially culturally, but also politically. Joining us right now is Senator Jim Talent, Reagan Institute Chairman of the National Leadership Council, at Jim Talent on Twitter. And Senator, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your expectations are going to be for the first few days, not just of the congressional session, but of course of Donald Trump's presidency, his return to the presidency. There's a lot of day one stuff that's going on. I think expectations are high. How does Trump manage those expectations? What do you think realistically is going to get done in, say, the first day and then the first 100 days of this upcoming term?
Well, the first day, Ed, he'll issue all the executive orders he's been talking about issuing, and there's no reason in the world that shouldn't happen. He's going to have the orders ready. All he's got to do is sign them. The first 100 days, Ed, I think this can be a really, really prolific legislative session. We're going to see, we need to get the economy moving, which means starting to pass the reconciliation bill, getting that done. It won't all happen in the first 100 days. Getting energy production up, securing the border, a lot of that's going to be executive action, and then getting woke out of government and using government powers insofar as appropriate to influence other institutions to get the woke stuff out of it. That's going to be very important. And then, of course, in foreign policy, and you were talking with Noah Rothman about Ukraine and about the Middle East, this can be a really outstanding session. And my major concern is not with Trump. It's whether the House is going to be able to do its part by passing a budget and passing a reconciliation bill. It's going to take better leadership and better followership than we've had in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the issue that I have too, which is that we're about to stumble into another food fight over leadership that is at least has a potential of delaying some of this and maybe even undercutting some of the enthusiasm and momentum that has been building up over the last, during the transition, I would say, since the election. I'm not sure how much you're hearing about that. Does it look like Donald Trump is going to be able to tamp that down and get things going, or are we just really going to have to endure another food fight?
Well, I don't know, and that scares me that I don't know. The president's going to have to be more involved than I think he was in the first term, and I think probably than he would like to be. I don't think this is an area any president really wants to be all that involved in, Ed, managing the Congress. Yep. But basically, the Republicans have a 2-vote majority, Ed. So anything that passes on a partisan basis, 100% of the Republicans have to vote for. So people have to understand, nobody's going to get everything they want. Everybody's going to have to vote for some things they would prefer not to vote for. If they'll do that, they can all get 80 to 90% of what they want and what the country needs. And that's what we're going to need for the first few months until we start filling some of these special election races. And then we'll have a couple more votes to play with. But look, Johnson needs to be the speaker. They don't have anybody else lined up. He did a good job last year. He didn't handle the CR well. But look, are we going to ever find a speaker who makes no mistakes? So that's what I'm going to be watching the first week. How does the House do?
I think that, yeah. I exactly, and I think that's really where it sits. I will say this. My impression is that Donald Trump is much more prepared coming into the second term than he was in the first term. As you said, he's got the EOs already written. They're ready to drop. He's already really laid out all of the major appointments and some of even the secondary appointments, and I would say even maybe a couple of the tertiary appointments. They're very different from the first term. Do you see the same thing? Does this look like it's much more ready to roll on day one?
Oh, Ed, there's absolutely no question. And the Senate is now going to have to confirm these noms, and they're going to do that. I mean, I think all of them are better. I mean, even the ones that are in trouble are better than 50-50. We'll see what happens at the hearings. This could be. There's so much of the agenda that can be done through effective executive action. All of the border stuff, or most of it, most of the energy stuff. Again, the executive orders, getting the woke and the transgender agenda out of the government. The foreign policy stuff, that's up to the president. So what Congress has got to do is pass a reconciliation bill and include within that reconciliation bill the additional funds the president needs for the border. And I think, if that's all they can do in the House in the first 100 days, that's most of what needs to be done, Ed. So this is doable. We just have to have focus within our congressional majorities, and particularly in the House.
For the legislative agenda, certainly. But yes, I think the border is the very first order of business. We've got about 20 seconds. I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, that's true. But you can see what Trump's doing. One of the first people he picked was Tom Homan. So even before he gets his statutory officers confirmed, Homan is going to be working from the White House with the career people to begin reimposing the policies that worked in the first Trump term. So he's got these people out there. He just has to execute, and I think he's ready to do it.
Coming up to the end of the year, we're going to be assessing in this hour the historical place in which the Joe Biden administration will find itself. And all of the marvelous spin that is going to be taking place by the Biden administration, by the protection racket media that has been protecting it all this time, and pretty much everybody with a stake in trying to shift blame for everything that happened on Biden's watch to Donald Trump, either before or after, because of course Donald Trump is bookending the Biden era, if you will, the 4 years of somebody or some people governing America in the guise of Joe Biden. And I'm telling you that the spin is going to be coming at us hard. It's going to be coming at us fast. It's going to be coming at us relentlessly. And we're going to be talking about that in this hour. It's going to take an hour to go over all of this stuff, I think. And this is just the openers, folks. It's December 26th. By the time you get to January 19th, there will be books written talking about how Joe Biden was the standard bearer for what our founding fathers put in place. And if you think I'm exaggerating, that's exactly what April Ryan said on MSNBC, the soon to blink out of existence cable channel that nobody's watching these days. April Ryan was talking about, this is in the context of Joe Biden vetoing a bipartisan bill to expand federal judgeships. And we're going to talk a little bit about this because it's actually a pretty interesting issue. The bill was structured in such a way that it would expand these, it would create more federal judges over a series of years that would allow multiple presidents to name the first judges to those positions. And the idea there is that there would at least be an opportunity for a Republican president, which would be Donald Trump, and potentially a Democrat successor after Donald Trump, to name some of these judges. So everybody would have a little bite at the apple. And it's actually a pretty well-structured bill. it managed to get through one of the most narrowly divided Congresses ever in American history. So it was at least popular enough to where there was a consensus that we needed to add these judgeships. And actually, Jonathan Turley wrote about that this morning, talking about how badly the federal judiciary has not kept up with the pace of cases. And I'll just quote from Jonathan Turley here. This is before I get to Joe Founding Father Biden here, as April Ryan casts it. He says, the move by Biden is a disgrace. Our courts are overwhelmed by dockets that leave parties without any resolution for years. In 2004, so 20 years ago, the number of cases in district court pending for more than 3 years was 18,820. This year, there are 81,617. That is a fourfold increase in 20 years. And that's my own commentary there. And then he goes on, and I'll quote him again. If justice delayed is justice denied, our court system is becoming a tar pit of injustice with litigants left without verdicts or relief for years. And, some of this is just the fact that Americans are kind of litigious and they like going to court, and sometimes for nonsense things. But, that's always been the case. That's not new. What is new is that we just don't have enough judges and enough courts to deal with that situation. And so Democrats and Republicans got together, decided that they were going to fix the problem, and Joe Biden decided to veto it because it would mean that Donald Trump could name a few more judges. Really, that's it. That's apparently what the Founding Fathers wanted. In order to hear this argument, let's go to cut number 2.
Simple. This president, Joe Biden, did not want to give President-elect Donald Trump a chance to add more conservatism into our courts. Bottom line. You have so many people talking about how everything is weighed down right now. The White House on January 20th at noon will be Republican. The House and the Senate, Republican. And the Supreme Court leans Republican. So this president wanted to ensure checks and balances. He is that standard bearer from what the Founding Fathers put in place. He wants checks and balances, and he wants to make sure everything goes well. And think about this. Even though it wasn't a federal judgeship, think about what happened with Merrick Garland. Think about the fact that Merrick Garland never got a chance to even have interviews with some senators. And because they rebuffed, they did not want to have a Democrat on the U.S. Supreme Court. And in some ways, this is that as well. This is trying to hold the line to make sure, once again, that fairness and equal play and checks and balances are in place.
So let's start with the checks and balances argument. You know what provides checks and balances to the government? Federal courts. That's the purpose of the federal judiciary. One of the purposes of the federal judiciary is to provide a check and a balance between the legislature and the executive. So if you want more checks and balances, you have to have enough judges to deal with the cases that arise, especially at the federal level, right? We're not talking about state courts or local magistrates. We're talking about federal courts, which is where the checks and balances take place. He's literally vetoing expanding the checks and balances. Because if it takes years to get these things through, and it's not, these cases aren't just about federal power, right? But in the federal courts, a significant number of cases that are brought have to do with overreach of federal power, right? Bureaucracies that are overstepping their boundaries and that sort of thing. If it takes years for those cases to get heard through the courts, then you don't have the checks and balances. This is one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard in terms of, checks and balances. He's literally vetoing more checks and balances, and she's saying this is exactly what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Joe Biden is, he's vetoing a bill to prevent a successor from nominating federal judges. That is absolutely not what the federal government, or what the Founding Fathers had in mind. The Founding Fathers had in mind that presidents could make appointments and that people would come together to decide what the proper size of the federal judiciary should be in order to make sure that, justice could be provided in a fairly speedy manner. And you know how we know that speedy trials were a value that they were thinking about? It's in the Constitution. That's why the right to a speedy trial is in the Constitution. And while that doesn't necessarily apply to civil lawsuits, it's certainly a value that they had in mind. It's the reason why Democrats and Republicans actually came together to put this bill together, because they had that in mind. And there was a consensus. The consensus was that they structured this so that everybody got a little bit of a bite at the apple. And Joe Biden vetoed it because he just couldn't abide the fact that Donald Trump got elected president. Voters made Donald Trump president. Donald Trump has all the authority now to appoint judges. Now, I get that there's still, I got to be careful. I'm on the air. I got to make sure that I'm not doing podcast language here. I know they're still sore over the Merrick Garland thing. I'm actually very happy about the Merrick Garland thing, because after watching Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice, it's very clear that we dodged a huge bullet by keeping him off of the Supreme Court. That being said, I get why they're unhappy about that. They got outplayed. They don't like it. I totally get that. But that's not a reason to make 81,000 cases grow into 120,000 cases, which is apparently the trajectory that the Founding Fathers wanted, according to April Ryan. And I think you're seeing in this two things. One, I think you're seeing why MSNBC is dying, because this is utter nonsense. And she never does get around to explaining why Democrats were actually in favor of this bill. And number two, this is part of what we're going to be talking about in this hour, which is the attempt to rehabilitate one of the worst demagogues to occupy the White House, one of the most partisan presidents ever, a guy who ran as a centrist, completely lied, governed as a radical, and tried to recast him as Americana personified. And look, Joe Biden and Biden Incorporated can try to do this. What I find very interesting is how far the protection racket media is going to go in trying to pursue this. And this is one example. We're going to have others. We're going to talk about Joe Biden being the most emotional president. That's coming up in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about the panic that's happening over Donald Trump's presidency. All that's coming. It's all intended to shape the narrative. We got a great promotion going on right now. And this is a lot of fun. Salem Media is giving you a chance to win a once-in-a-lifetime inauguration VIP experience. A trip for two to Washington, D.C., including hotel accommodations and a $600 Visa gift card, tickets to the Trump inauguration, and tickets to an inaugural ball. To enter, just text TRUMP, T-R-U-M-P, to 94878. 94878. Just text TRUMP to 94878. To win a chance to attend the inauguration. Man, that's a lot of fun. I'm hoping that I'm already jealous of whoever's going to end up winning that. As a Salem employee, I'm almost dead certain that I don't qualify. That's fine too. I'm hoping one of you qualifies. Somebody that's listening right now to this, I'm hoping qualifies for it. So if you are and you win it, you got to let me know. So if you texted because I was talking about it, you got to let me know, because then I know who to be jealous of. All right. Speaking of jealous. Dwayne's still looking pretty trim on this myphdweightloss.com program. You dial 864-644-1900 to join Dwayne on his myphdweightloss.com journey. You can make your appointment for a consultation. No pills, no injections. They even include 80% of your food if you want it. My problem was the 120% of my food that I used to eat. So, right? Am I right, Dwayne?
That's the thing, is if you do the program the right way, you don't ever really get to the point where you're hungry, because they let you eat about 5 times a day, just smaller portions spaced out, so you never really do feel hungry.
It's actually a strategy for diabetics too. Is you eat small meals, but
it's more regulated.
It's regulated during the day. You eat 4 or 5 times, but you very much smaller
portions. Right.
So you don't get the big spikes. You don't get the big lows, and the big lows are what kind of induce you to overeat later. And so that's also a strategy there too. But you're looking good, and I'm kind of curious as how you managed Christmas on the myphdweightloss.com plan.
Well, let's just say I managed Christmas by knowing that I can jump back on the program pretty darn quick and lose the 5 I probably put on. It was a hectic it was a hectic couple of days, and I would be lying if I didn't say I slipped a little bit. But again, you can hop back on the program, and it's not too hard to course correct. That's the cool thing about the maintenance thing is, it's not like if you gain a pound, it's the end of all things. If you put on 2 or 3 pounds, you can certainly get right back on the beam again and take it right back off.
Well, and this is why myphdweightloss.com works, and
it adapts to real life. It adapts to real life.
And it's not a diet, right? This is about programming yourself to going from living to eat to eating to live. Right. I mean, that's kind of the idea here. And so this is not a diet that the 2 week I eat nothing but nuts and berries sort of thing, and you go back and you still have all your old habits when you go off your diet. This is restructuring your life so that you're making good rational choices.
Right. And you learn what kind of foods do different kinds of things to you, and you just learn how to manage it.
And that's the reason why, this is the reason why you call for a consultation. myphdweightloss.com, 864-644-1900, is because you need to have that sort of planning. That's part of the process. This is part of what you're getting from joining myphdweightloss.com is being able to set all that up. And got about 30 seconds, Dwayne.
Absolutely. You have a counselor that meets with you and comes up with whatever your schedule is and what your dietary needs are, what kind of foods you like, what you don't like, and they will put together a program almost, regardless of who you are or what your tastes are. They'll come up with a way to make it workable for you and put you on a path to success.
Put you on a path to success that's about having the right lifestyle to support what it is that you need. And that's exactly what this does. myphdweightloss.com, 864-644-1900. Some breaking news this morning, by the way, and does kind of relate to the Biden presidency, but it is breaking news all on its own. The Wall Street Journal is reporting this morning that one of the, actually 2 of the intelligence agencies within the intelligence community concluded, one being the FBI and the other being a medical unit at the Defense Intelligence Agency, concluded that COVID was caused by a manipulated virus in a lab environment. The DIA unit had actually done a scientific study of the virus and reached that conclusion. And we're only finding out about it now because the FBI was, after presenting this data, was not invited to brief the president about their findings. Instead, the only people that were apparently at this meeting were people who were going with the zoonotic, explanation for it, that it jumped from an animal to a human being somewhere in Wuhan, right where there happens to be a lab that was doing the gain of function research, which could manipulate a virus that could turn a virus into something deadly and create a pandemic. Some things you don't really need a whole lot of data on. If you've got a deadly pandemic on a virus that nobody has ever seen before, and it breaks out right next to the laboratory where they're doing gain of function research on said virus, I think you've got an idea of where this thing came from. I'm surprised at how broad it was that people were trying to deny reality on this thing. And I remember when that was considered a conspiracy theory, when social media platforms were suppressing people who said this looks like a lab leak. And they were shutting down scientists that said this does not appear to be a zoonotic transfer. So now the truth can be told as Joe Biden is exiting the White House, apparently. It won't be the last truth that's told about Joe Biden either, but Wall Street Journal has that this morning, so be sure to go over there and check that out. Getting back, though, to the whole Joe Biden is the greatest thing since sliced bread argument that is starting to roll out here. There's another one. There's another cut from MSNBC that we got to talk about here, and that is Susan Del Percio, who is very happy that Joe Biden is emotional. I guess. Let's take a listen to cut number 4.
I do think his handling of COVID, bringing the vaccination to the public at a critical time, will be certainly remembered. The way he came into office. And I think it'll be a little mixed on how he decided to run for re-election and then had to step back from it. Because in many ways, you could argue he should never have made that announcement knowing his declining health. And yet there was nothing more patriotic than stepping away from it. So I think it'll probably end up, frankly, being right down the middle. I don't think we'll see anything extraordinary, except for when it comes to kindness. I will give him that. He'll probably be known as one of the kinder, most emotional presidents we've had.
Kindness?
What? What?
The man is meaner than a bag of cut snakes.
I mean, this is a
There's
guy who has been a
kind
vicious
about
demagogue.
him.
He's been a vicious demagogue his entire political career. He's still a vicious demagogue.
Look fat.
To this day. This is the guy who called half of America garbage because they were going to vote for Donald Trump. That was his exit. Is that half of you are garbage? I mean, you can call that all sorts of things, but kind is not one of the things that comes leaping to mind in this. He was calling people fascists. He was. I mean, this is a guy who is, like you said, first off, thoroughly corrupt. Lied repeatedly about things. The whole Russian disinformation thing about the Hunter Biden laptop. The whole Biden Incorporated corruption scheme. This guy who's been lying through his entire presidency, the guy who was, when confronted with the fact that 13 members of America's armed services were killed in Kabul, and you had people clinging to airplanes as they were taking off as America bugged out from Afghanistan, told the interviewer, and I believe it was Stephanopoulos, well, that was 4 or 5 days ago.
You remember the red backlit
yes.
Philly speech, also known as the Nuremberg rally?
The Nuremberg rally. Yeah. And I will say this about that. If you look at the wide shot, it's red, white, and blue, right? They painted Independence Hall in red, white, and blue.
Yes.
However, they positioned the camera so that the red part was behind
all red,
him,
baby. Yes.
and zoomed in on him. And I mean, that's a failure of the White House staff. I mean, nobody looked at that and said, maybe we should have the blue behind them. Maybe we should have the white behind them.
But I'm talking about the words he said. There wasn't a kind word
I
in
agree.
there.
I agree. No. It was nasty. He's a nasty, nasty, nasty old man. He's always been a nasty guy. If you want to see the real Joe Biden, look at that 1987 clip where a guy starts to argue with him in a bar, and he damn near throws a punch at the guy for arguing with them, claims that his IQ is so much higher than the person that he's talking with, lies, and then starts telling lies about, I was top half of my class in law school, I was full scholarship, all sorts of nonsense. This is a guy who stole Neil Kinnock's life in order to, for his own biography in a speech in that same cycle. Kind?
Right. The prospective voter in a primary in 2020 that challenged him, and he says, look fat, right?
Yeah. No, this guy is not kind. But this is part of the whole retconning, right, of Joe Biden. And to be honest with you, it's not that much different from what we were hearing about Joe Biden before he even got into office, right? It was all about Joe Biden's empathy. Oh, he's very empathetic. Scranton Joe, he's very empathetic.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's a whole other thing, right? But this is the same Joe Biden who, couldn't wait to demonize his opponents, and not just in this cycle. I mean, let's remember what he said about Mitt Romney in 2012. He's talking to black voters. I forget where exactly this took place. He's talking to black voters and said Mitt Romney's going to put you all back in chains. Yeah, that must be Joe Biden's kindness, comedy. The founding fathers' vision for April, from April Ryan. The founding fathers' vision is telling people that Mitt Romney, of all people, right? Mitt Romney is going to put black people back into slavery. I I mean,
and
it's
absurd.
absurd.
And as far as being the most emotional president, I guess if you include angry and bitter as the only emotion, yeah, I could put him in there.
Well, right. And to deconstruct a little bit more of this, the whole idea that it was patriotic for him to step down sort of overlooks the fact that it took 3 weeks for him to do that, right? Almost a full month, actually. It was June 27th to July 21. And he only did it under pressure. And he shouldn't have been running in the first place.
Right.
He shouldn't have run the first time in the first place, because as we are now finding out, they have been trying to cover up his cognitive decline since the day he took office, and probably before that.
And there was nothing patriotic about it, because if he were to do the patriotic thing, he would have turned it over, not endorsed, and basically said, let's do a little mini primary and let the voters decide. No, that's not what he did. He turned around and endorsed Kamala right away, icing everybody else out and forcing people to line up behind somebody that had never won a primary vote or a delegate in 2 different elections.
Yeah, no, and didn't do very well as a result, although she did better than she probably deserved. But I mean, so the whole idea that this is a guy who is, compassionate after you see what happened in Afghanistan, and he actually abandoned Americans, 14,000 of them, according to the State Department, in Afghanistan, both citizens and legal permanent residents, abandoned 14,000 of them to the Taliban. I don't think that that's an act of a kind man. And it's, I mean, this is again, the protection racket media is complicit in the cover-up, right? In the conspiracy to cover up Joe Biden's cognitive incapacity. And they're trying to cover it up.
How many family members of victims of violent crime that were killed, that he just let their killers off of death row?
Well, let's not even go there. Let's not even go there. We just found out this week that he made the families of those 13 servicemen and women wait for 3 hours on the tarmac to see the coffins so he could take a nap on Air Force One. Yeah, that's kindness. That's empathy. That's Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden all over. It didn't surprise me a bit, by the way. Did not surprise me a bit. We do want to sort of close the loop on the retconning of the Biden-Harris administration. Now, this one, I grant you, this clip actually comes from somebody with a vested interest in it. So, I understand that Doug Emhoff has every reason to try to promote his wife. But this was just a little difficult for me to buy. Let's go to cut number 1.
I thought coming into this role that being the first guy ever would be a big deal. But it really turned out being the first Jew was a big deal. And I took that as a responsibility. I feel and felt very accountable being the first Jewish person in this role. And with that accountability and responsibility meant action. The other thing that I did with your help was to live my faith, which is different from hers, but with her support, openly and proudly, joyfully, and without fear.
That would be nice, and it's certainly a lovely sentiment to offer about your wife in a public setting. This was from the DNC holiday party, so I'm not going to quibble about that so much, but what I will say is that over the last 14 months, this administration has not allowed Jewish men and women to live their faith without fear in places like Columbia University, the other Ivy Leagues, inner cities, Philadelphia, New York City, where there have been all sorts of violence directed at Jews, Detroit. They have been pandering to the Free Palestine movement, Answer Coalition. You just see this on the screen here. Answer is a Stalinist activist organization. It's been around for a long time. These people were they weren't just doing protests, they were actually conducting intimidation campaigns and worse, especially on college campuses. And this administration's response to that was to encourage them and to play footsie with them, do a lot of both sidesism with them. And this is at the same time that, of course, that the people that they're demonstrating in favor of had just committed mass atrocities, had murdered more Jewish people on a single day than any other day since the Holocaust. And that's.
I just reject
this
this whole premise. I reject this premise where he says, "I thought being the first dude was going to be, the big deal," and it turns out being the first Jew was. Did anybody on either the left or the right make a deal about him being Jewish? I
don't think it even came up until after the Gaza thing started.
It
right?
was a non-story. It was
a non-story.
It's a straw man.
Are we sure that that's true?
What?
Are we sure that there hasn't been a vice presidential spouse that was Jewish? I'm not sure about that. Honestly, I mean, this is how little I've thought about this. It didn't even come to mind to check that out.
So
it might be true. I don't know, but
I reject the whole premise, and then I get the fact that he's praising Kamala for letting him do his thing, as opposed to what she's going to say.
Right.
You can't be a Jew in public. Is that really the marriage that he's going to have? Of course she's going to say that, right?
I don't know because this administration hasn't been too enthusiastic about telling everybody else that they can be a Jew in public after October 7th, right? I mean, we've seen violence. For the last, it's kind of tailed off over the last couple of months, but I mean, right up until the election, they were playing footsie with these people, trying to get them to vote for Kamala Harris,
right?
And and actually, as it turned out, in vain, because they were so angry over the fact that we're actually siding with the people who were the victims of October 7th, as opposed to the perpetrators of October 7th, that supposedly they all sat out the election. And that's the reason that could be one reason why Kamala Harris lost Michigan. It probably has nothing to do with the other swing states, but Michigan it might have had enough of an impact. We're not sure. We'll know more when more data becomes available from that. But I mean, this is sort of a retcon effort to reverse reality. There is no way that you can look at the last 14 months of this administration and say that this administration stood for religious freedom and stood up in defense of Jewish people, because it's simply not true. The opposite is true. And once again, they are trying to propagandize in this space. And again, with Doug Emhoff, I give him a little slack because he's talking about his wife personally, and I get that. That's fine. I don't begrudge him that. But you're going to see a lot more of this from the protection racket media trying to turn these two into heroes when they are absolute incompetence. Both of them are absolute incompetence. And neither one of them should have been in those positions.
And the only reason that they're trying to cover them up is to protect their own backsides for investing in them for the last 4 years.
Exactly. Dwayne Jolismo Patterson, you're guest hosting tomorrow. I'm done today. Merry Christmas to everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com.